Thank you, Alan. So I've been asked to do a quick introduction of John, but it's a bit like introducing Coles to Newcastle. On the off chance that there's anyone who doesn't know who John is, I would say that apart from being a great friend of mine and of many of us in the room, John was the very effective 10th president of Stanford, and he's now both the head of the Knight Hennessy Scholars Program, the chairman of Alphabet, and of course was a successful entrepreneur as well, so kind of the trifecta of Silicon Valley. It occurred to me that many of you, though hopefully you've been picking up your copies, may not have had the chance to read the book. So I can just summarize it as basically John's lessons on leadership and its traits, illustrated with stories from his own career and life journey. And it's a wonderful read. It would be a great Christmas present for all your family and friends. So buy lots of copies. John, you talk about 5 foundational traits of great leaders: humility, authenticity, leadership as service, empathy, and courage. And then what I would see as 5 methods of leading change: collaboration, innovation, curiosity, storytelling, and legacy, lasting change legacy. It's a fabulous list. Of course, it occurred to me reading it that these are important life skills for people, independent of whether they're actually leaders. But I want to start with a few questions on humility, the first trait on the list. You argue that real confidence comes from humility and not from ego. And that runs counter to a lot of conventional wisdom about the larger-than-life alpha leader running pretty much anything. Could you talk a bit about how you see humility developing real confidence?
Well, I think, Isaac, real confidence comes from first starting admitting that you don't know everything, that there are often in any organization people who know a lot more than you know about any aspect of the organization. And if you're going to be confident in your decision-making process and whatever you're setting in motion, getting their input and helping that shape your decision-making is absolutely crucial. And I kind of see hubris as the opposite of humility. It assumes I already know everything and that I can go ahead and forge ahead and make decisions. And that does 2 things. First of all, it makes you reluctant to ask for help, which is the first mistake. And the second, it makes you very reluctant to ever admit that you made a mistake. We all make mistakes. We all make mistakes. The question is how you respond to them, and if you believe your mistake, you're infallible, then you're not going to respond appropriately.
So what happens, though, if you have humility? Does humility undermine ambition?
So there's a sentence in the book, I think, which I firmly believe in, that says the only way to be humble and also to be ambitious is to be ambitious for the organization, the structure, what you're leading, what it's about. And here, my role model is Abraham Lincoln. Anybody who reads a Lincoln biography realizes Lincoln is ambitious, but he's ambitious to serve, initially, to serve the people of Sangamon County so that he can get internal improvements so that they can have a better life, have economic growth. And of course, eventually, serve the country and take it forward in through a very trying period. So he's ambitious to do that. He's not a shrinking violet, but he's ambitious for the right reasons, as opposed to the wrong reasons.
Not just personal gain.
Not just personal gain.
No.
Right.
So when you became president of Stanford, what was your ambition, and did it change over the time you were president?
Well, my ambition was to try to take Stanford forward, to make it a better institution, to leave it better off than when I started. The challenge, of course, was then to figure out how to do that and what made sense. And I'm, given my entrepreneurial background, I'm not a good fit for the storekeeper model. I'm the person who's going to try something different and try something new. And I felt at that time, particularly in the interim between when we completed the undergraduate campaign, which I think put in place what Stanford needed to be a world-class undergraduate institution, to compete with the very best anyway. And once we finished that, I thought, you know, the world is really not in good shape. Shouldn't the great research universities be doing more to explore and try to find solutions for these really big problems? Because at that time, I didn't see who else was going to do it. If the great universities didn't do it, I didn't think government was exactly, they're a key implementer, but they're not the innovator. They're not the innovator. So universities had to step up, and I think that was something that I came to over time. When we started, I didn't know that was the direction we wanted to head.
Well, that's how you find it.
Right.
It's by trial and error. So you describe in the book a lot about, obviously you have a deep background in business as well as in academics and universities, and you talk a lot about the similarities of leadership in those two settings. But I'm interested in a couple of the things that are very different about businesses and universities. So let's take two. The first is a majority of the Fortune 500 companies in 1955, so a little over 60 years ago, no longer exist.
Right.
But every major university that was a major university then is still a major university now. So we have at a university a more perpetual time horizon. We're not going to have hostile takeovers. We're not going to go out of business, we hope, without some errors. How did that affect you when you were in each of those different settings? That difference between a shorter term time horizon and a perpetual time horizon?
You know, it's a good question. I still remember getting ready for my speech at the inauguration. And I was sitting in the office in Building 10, and I'm thinking, David Stark Jordan was sitting in this office roughly 109 years earlier. He'd started as president and actually had finished it 15, 20 years after that. But he was sitting there, and I was thinking, now what were the smart things he did, and what were the things he didn't do that enabled Stanford to thrive more than 100 years later? So certainly that perspective. And for example, here's a really good example. I believe universities have obligations not only to the current generation of students and faculty, but to future generations of students and faculty. And the way in which we manage the endowment, for example, reflects that we're going to be able to, we're conservative in the use of the endowment so that we can continue to offer the same opportunities for students in the future. You know, companies think about survival, but they don't think in quite the same way about how they're going to have some kind of intergenerational equity. They're much more focused inherently on the current quarter, actually, which I think is probably not, is one of the things that great corporate leaders resist, is too much attention to what's happening in this quarter as opposed to what's happening over the next 5 years. But it's hard when there are financial analysts out there and your stock price goes up and down. It's tough to get that long-term perspective.
And you read every day in the Wall Street Journal how you're doing.
Yes, you do. You do. On a measured over very short periods
of time.
Yeah.